The photograph lies on my desk even now, yellowed and cracked at the edges. 6 men, all smiling. Cigarettes glowing in the darkness of a French night. June 5th, 1944, 24 hours before D-Day. I am the 7th man, the one who took the picture. I am also the only one who came home. Their laughter still echoes in my mind, louder than the artillery that would come with dawn, louder than the screams, louder than the silence that followed. This is their story. This is my burden. This is what it means to survive when Brotherhood dies around you. We called ourselves the Lucky Seven, a nickname born from foolish optimism and the desperate need to believe we were somehow protected. 7 soldiers from different corners of America, thrown together in the chaos of war, bonded by something deeper than blood. We'd survived North Africa. We'd walked through Sicily. We truly believed we were invincible. That night in the staging area near Portsmouth, England, felt different. The air tasted of salt and diesel fuel. Thousands of men packed into makeshift camps, waiting for orders that would send us across the English Channel into the teeth of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Everyone knew something massive was coming. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but not us. Not the Lucky Seven. Sergeant Michael O'Connor from Boston was the oldest at 28, a lifetime in war years. He'd been a factory worker before Pearl Harbor, strong as an ox with hands that could crush steel or hold a dying man with impossible gentleness. He sat on an ammunition crate, smoking a Lucky Strike, telling us about the girl he'd marry when this was over. Her name was Catherine. He showed us her photograph so many times we'd memorized every detail of her face. Next to him, Private Danny Sullivan from Chicago, barely 19, couldn't grow a proper beard, but could strip and reassemble a Browning automatic rifle blindfolded. He was laughing at O'Connor's stories, his whole face lighting up with youth that seemed obscene in a place preparing for slaughter. Danny still believed in Hollywood endings. He still thought good guys always won. Corporal James Jimmy Washington from Alabama had the deepest voice I'd ever heard. He sang gospel songs when the nights got too quiet, when the memories got too loud. He was the only black man in our unit, carried the weight of fighting for a country that didn't fully accept him, yet never complained. His faith was absolute. He believed God had a plan. Even then, Private First Class Robert Chen from San Francisco was our medic, son of Chinese immigrants, carrying his own burden of proving loyalty while his people faced internment and suspicion back home. He was quiet, methodical, the one who kept us alive through infections and shrapnel wounds. He barely spoke about his family, but I saw him writing letters every night, pages and pages he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to send. Then there was Tommy Bradford from rural Texas, a farm boy who could shoot a rifle like he was born with one. He'd lied about his age to enlist at 17, desperate to escape poverty and find purpose. He found both in the worst possible way. That night, he was cleaning his M1 Garand with the careful attention of someone performing a religious ritual. And Private Eddie Morrison from New York City, our radio man, fast-talking and funny, always with a joke to cut through the darkness. He dreamed of being a comedian after the war, said he was collecting material. The irony would later destroy me. There was nothing funny about what happened next. I was David Foster, from a small town in Pennsylvania nobody's heard of. I was the unit's scout, the one with sharp eyes and steady hands. I was the one with the camera, documenting everything, preserving moments I didn't know would become ghosts. We huddled together that night because orders forbade open fires, but nobody stopped us from smoking. The red embers of our cigarettes were tiny beacons of humanity in the mechanical darkness of war preparation. Around us, thousands of men whispered prayers, wrote final letters, stared into space with the hollow eyes of those who knew death was coming. But we laughed. God help us, we laughed. O'Connor was telling a story about a bar fight in North Africa, exaggerating wildly, his Boston accent getting thicker with each detail. Danny was doubled over, gasping. Jimmy was shaking his head, smiling that warm smile. Chen was actually chuckling, a rare sound. Tommy grinned around his cigarette. Eddie was already planning his version of the story, adding punchlines. I raised my camera. The flash exploded. For one instant, they were frozen in time. Young, alive, together. 7 brothers who believed they were lucky. 7 men who had no idea that luck was just another word for borrowed time. The Lucky 7 didn't start as friends. War doesn't care about compatibility. It throws strangers together and either forges them into something unbreakable or shatters them into isolated fragments of trauma. We became the former through shared suffering that stripped away everything except the essential truth of who we were. I met O'Connor first, in a troop ship crossing the Atlantic in early 1943. I was terrified, 18 years old, surrounded by men who seemed impossibly brave. He found me vomiting over the side of the ship. Seasickness and fear in equal measure. He didn't mock me. He just stood there, solid as granite, and said, "First time's always the worst. Second time too, probably. But you'll make it, kid." I can tell. He was wrong about so many things, but he was right about that. I made it. He didn't. Danny joined us in North Africa, a replacement after our unit took casualties in Tunisia. He was so young, so eager, so desperate to prove himself. The veterans hazed him mercilessly at first, the cruel tradition of men turning their fear into aggression against the new and vulnerable. O'Connor stopped it, took Danny under his protection, made him part of our circle. Danny worshipped him after that, followed him like a loyal dog. Jimmy came later, transferred from a segregated unit after demonstrating exceptional courage under fire. The Army was slowly, reluctantly integrating, and Jimmy was one of the pioneers who paid the price of being first. Some men in our company made their prejudice clear. O'Connor made his position clearer. One racist corporal ended up with a broken nose and a sudden transfer. After that, Jimmy was one of us. The brass didn't like it, but O'Connor was too valuable to discipline seriously. Chen saved my life in Sicily, pulled me out of a building seconds before it collapsed under artillery fire. I'd been too focused on getting a photograph of the destruction, too stupid to recognize the groaning of failing structure. He grabbed me, dragged me out, didn't say a word about it afterward. That's who he was. Quiet heroism without expectation of recognition. I owed him everything. I couldn't save him when it mattered. Tommy and Eddie joined our squad during the regrouping before the Normandy invasion. Fresh replacements again, filling gaps left by men who'd fallen in Italy. They were different. Tommy silent and deadly, Eddie loud and vital. But they fit. Within weeks, it felt like they'd always been part of us. War compresses time. Friendships that should take years form in days. Bonds that should be tested by decades are tested by bullets instead. Those months before D-Day were strange. We trained relentlessly, practiced beach landings, studied maps and models of French coastline. Everyone knew something enormous was being planned. The largest amphibious invasion in history. The beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, or the beginning of a catastrophic defeat that would prolong the war for years. The emotional war story of our friendship deepened during those endless days of preparation. We shared everything. Food, cigarettes, letters from home, fears we couldn't voice to anyone else. O'Connor talked about Catherine constantly, his voice softening whenever he said her name. He carried her photograph in a waterproof pouch over his heart, promised her in letters that he'd come home, that they'd have 3 kids and a house in the suburbs and normal, beautiful, boring happiness. Danny wrote to his mother every week, simple letters full of reassurance and lies. He never told her how scared he was, how the nightmares from North Africa woke him gasping. He kept his fear buried under optimism so aggressive it almost convinced us. Jimmy's faith became our anchor. When the doubt crept in, when the weight of what we were about to attempt threatened to crush us, he sang. His voice rolled out across the camp, rich and powerful, and men stopped what they were doing to listen. He sang about deliverance, about valleys of shadows, about fear finding no home in righteous hearts. I don't know if he believed every word, but we needed to believe he did. Chen barely talked about his family, but I knew the silence hurt him. His parents and sister were in an internment camp in California, imprisoned by the same country he was fighting for. The injustice burned in him quietly, a controlled fire that never went out. He channeled it into keeping us alive, into being the best medic in the division, into proving his loyalty through blood and dedication. Tommy found peace in precision. He could hit a target at 300 yards in any weather. He didn't brag about it. It was simply what he did. He maintained his rifle with religious devotion, found comfort in the mechanical certainty of weapon maintenance. In chaos, he created small islands of control. Eddie talked constantly, filled silences with stories and jokes and observations. At first, I thought it was just his personality. Later, I understood it was survival. If he kept talking, he didn't have to think. If he kept us laughing, he didn't have to face the fear. His humor was armor, and we loved him for it. That night of June 5th wasn't the first time we'd faced danger together. We'd been under fire. We'd seen men die. We'd killed. We'd survived. But something felt different about this mission. Maybe it was the scale, the thousands of ships, the hundreds of thousands of men, the weight of knowing the entire war might pivot on what happened in the next 48 hours. Or maybe we'd just run out of luck, and some part of us knew it. They woke us at Oro 200 hours on June 6th, 1944. The world was dark and cold, the English Channel churning with waves that promised misery. We assembled in silence, checked our equipment with mechanical precision born from training and terror. Each man carried roughly 60 pounds of gear: rifle, ammunition, Rations, grenades, entrenching tool, gas mask, first aid kit. We were pack animals preparing to storm hell. The landing craft waited at the dock. Flat-bottomed vessels designed to beach themselves on hostile shores and disgorge their human cargo into machine gun fire. They looked like coffins to me. Perhaps they were. We boarded in darkness, the Lucky Seven staying together through some unspoken agreement. O'Connor went first, helping each of us into the craft with steady hands. The vessel rocked sickeningly in the waves. Around us, hundreds of identical craft were loading thousands of identical soldiers. The armada stretched beyond sight, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. We were drops in an ocean of men, individually insignificant, collectively unstoppable. Or so we told ourselves. The crossing took hours. The channel was rougher than expected. Waves slamming against the landing craft, spray soaking us through our uniforms despite the high sides. Men vomited. Men prayed. Men stared at nothing, faces blank with the awful knowledge of what was coming. I clutched my camera, waterproofed and precious, the one piece of home I'd brought to war. Documenting the truth felt important, even then. Especially then, Eddie tried to joke. His voice cracked. Nobody laughed. Even he couldn't cut through the weight of what we were sailing toward. Through the darkness, we could hear the thunder of naval bombardment. Massive shells from battleships and cruisers pounding the German defenses. The barrage was supposed to destroy the bunkers, the gun emplacements, the obstacles. It was supposed to make the landing possible. It didn't. As dawn broke, we saw Omaha Beach for the first time. Through the morning mist and smoke, we could see the cliffs, the fortifications, the killing ground we were about to enter. The beach was maybe 300 yards of open sand, backed by bluffs riddled with German positions. There was no cover, no concealment, just open space designed perfectly for slaughter. This is what a true war tale never fully captures, the moments before combat, when you know death is coming but you haven't met it yet. Time becomes strange. Seconds stretch into hours. Your mind races through memories, through everything you might lose, through every small moment you took for granted. Your body floods with chemicals that make colors brighter, sounds sharper, fear absolute. O'Connor looked at each of us in turn. His eyes were calm, but I saw the truth beneath the surface. He knew, we all knew. Some of us wouldn't leave that beach alive. The only question was who, and how much it would hurt. "Stay together," he said, his voice barely audible over the engines and waves and distant explosions. "Watch your sectors. Move fast. Don't stop for anything until we reach the seawall. Understand?" We nodded. "What else could we do?" Jimmy started singing, soft and low, a hymn I didn't recognize. His voice wrapped around us, a shield of faith against the mechanical violence ahead. Chen checked his medical supplies for the 100th time. Tommy verified his rifle was loaded, safety off, ready to kill the moment we hit the beach. Danny's hands were shaking, but his jaw was set with determination that broke my heart. Eddie met my eyes. The Joker was gone. What remained was just a scared kid from Brooklyn who wanted to go home. He tried to smile. Failed. "Get a good picture, Foster," he said. "Make us famous." I wanted to tell him I would. I wanted to promise we'd all be in the photograph, laughing about this later. Old men with grandchildren who couldn't imagine what we'd endured. I wanted to lie. I opened my mouth. The words wouldn't come. The landing craft lurched. We were close now. Through the opening at the front, I could see the beach approaching. The naval bombardment had stopped. An eerie silence fell, broken only by the sound of engines and waves. In that moment of quiet, the world held its breath. Then the ramp dropped, and hell began. The machine gun fire started immediately. A hurricane of metal that tore through the men at the front of the craft before they could take 3 steps. The water around us exploded with impacts, geysers of white spray mixed with red. Men screamed, men fell. The living climbed over the dead because there was nowhere else to go. "Move! Move! Move!" O'Connor was roaring, pushing us forward because stopping meant dying where we stood. We plunged into water that was chest deep, cold as death, heavy with equipment that wanted to drag us under. The beach was maybe 50 yards away. It looked like miles. I kept my camera above the water, some insane part of my brain still thinking about documentation, about preserving this moment. Around me, soldiers from the company and WWII were dying in ways too terrible to describe. The water was red. Bodies floated. Men drowned under the weight of their own gear. Machine gun fire raked the survivors in precise mechanical sweeps. I made it to the beach. Threw myself flat behind a wooden obstacle the Germans had placed to destroy landing craft. Bullets kicked up sand inches from my face. Explosions shook the ground. The noise was indescribable. A physical force that battered the mind as much as the body. This was the soldiers in battle that history books sterilize, that movies glamorize. that words can never truly capture. I looked for the lucky 7. Started counting. Needed to count. Had to know. O'Connor was 10 yards to my right, behind a steel hedgehog obstacle. Firing his rifle at German positions we could barely see through the smoke and chaos. He was alive. I felt desperate relief that shamed me. Glad he'd survived when men on either side had been cut down. Danny was with him, loading magazines with shaking hands, young face streaked with salt water and terror. 2. Jimmy was further up the beach somehow. Impossibly, running toward a wounded soldier who was screaming for a medic. Machine gun fire tracked him. He dove, rolled, kept moving. His size made him an obvious target, but God or luck or fate protected him. He reached the wounded man, started dragging him toward cover. 3. Chen was doing the same thing, moving among the wounded with complete disregard for his own safety. That was his nature. The oath he'd taken to heal was stronger than the instinct to survive. He worked on a soldier with his leg blown off. Tourniquets and pressure and calm words in the middle of apocalypse. 4. Tommy had made it to the seawall, the low concrete barrier that marked the edge of the beach proper. He was firing precisely, methodically, making every shot count. Even in chaos, he was deadly. Even facing his own death, he was bringing it to others. 5. Eddie was next to me, pressed against the wooden obstacle, radio still somehow on his back, alive but hyperventilating with panic he couldn't control. "We're gonna die here," he kept saying over and over. "We're all gonna die here." "Shut up," I told him, not unkindly. "We're moving, on 3. Run to the seawall. Don't stop. Understand?" He nodded. Didn't believe it. Neither did I, but movement was survival. Staying was death. 6. I counted again. 6. Where was 7? "Eddie, where's Tommy Bradford?" I screamed over the noise. Eddie pointed. Further up the beach. Tommy was still there, still firing. He was alone. Something was wrong. The count was wrong. 7 of us came off that boat. I could see 6. Who was, then I remembered. Tommy wasn't the 7th. Someone else was. Another new replacement I barely knew, assigned to our unit at the last moment. Private Marcus Webb from Georgia. Quiet kid who'd barely said 10 words to any of us. Where was he? I looked back at the water. The answer was there, floating face down in the red tide. He'd died in the first 30 seconds, cut down before he could even raise his rifle. The lucky 7 had become 6 before we'd even reached sand. The story of love and loss in war began right there, with a kid whose name I'd barely learned, whose face I struggled to remember, whose death meant nothing to the battle, but everything to someone back home who'd never know exactly how or why or how little time it took. "Move." O'Connor's voice cut through my shock. He was advancing, staying low, firing and moving in the way we'd practiced thousands of times. Danny followed. They were heading toward the seawall where Tommy waited. I grabbed Eddie, pulled him to his feet, and we ran. The 50 yards to the seawall took forever. Took seconds. Time was meaningless in that hellscape. We ran through a landscape of fire and death, through chaos that erased everything except the desperate animal need to survive. Men were dying on all sides. Units were being destroyed. The invasion that was supposed to sweep across the beach in minutes had stalled in carnage. But some of us kept moving. Some of us were still alive. The lucky 6 crashed against the seawall, gasping, bleeding from wounds we hadn't noticed. Our WWII story of Brotherhood still intact, despite everything trying to tear it apart. We were together. We'd made it. Against impossible odds, through machine gun fire that had killed hundreds around us, we'd survived the beach. I felt savage joy, guilt, disbelief. We were invincible after all. The lucky 7, minus one we'd barely known, was still strong. O'Connor was already organizing. That's who he was. Even in the worst moment of his life, he was thinking tactically, looking for the next objective. The bluffs rose above us, honeycombed with German positions. We couldn't stay pinned on the beach. We had to advance or die trying. Engineers were trying to blow gaps in the wire and obstacles. Infantry was gathering for the push up the draws and hillsides. Chen was working on wounded men. His hands were steady, his voice calm, even as artillery started landing among the survivors. Jimmy was helping him, his massive frame shielding the injured from shrapnel. Tommy was reloading, checking his ammunition, preparing for the next phase. Eddie was sitting against the wall, staring at nothing, clearly in shock, but still breathing. Still alive. We should have stayed there. We should have waited for orders, for reinforcements, for the chaos to settle. But O'Connor saw an opportunity. A small ravine leading up the bluff, lightly defended, a potential breakthrough point. If we could get up there, flank the German positions, we might open a path for others. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, exactly the kind of insane courage that wins medals or gets everyone killed. Foster, Danny, Tommy, with me. We're going up. Jimmy, Chen, Eddie, stay here. Help the wounded. We'll signal when we've made it. It was the last order he ever gave. It was the order that killed him. The ravine was steep, choked with barbed wire and mines, overshadowed by concrete bunkers that had survived the naval bombardment. We climbed in single file. O'Connor leading, Tommy behind him, me third, Danny bringing up the rear. Every step was danger. Every breath might be the last. But we kept climbing because stopping meant the entire beach stayed pinned. Meant more men dying in the surf. Meant failure. We were halfway up when the German counterattack hit. Infantry poured out of positions we hadn't seen, firing down on us from above. We were exposed, trapped in the ravine with nowhere to go but forward or back, and both meant death. O'Connor charged. That's the only word for it. He roared like something primal and attacked uphill, firing from the hip, impossible and heroic and stupid and brave. Tommy and I followed because what else could we do? Leave him to die alone? Danny was screaming behind us, firing wildly, young and terrified and trying so hard to be brave. We almost made it. We got close enough to throw grenades into the German position, close enough to see the faces of the men trying to kill us, close enough for O'Connor to believe we'd succeed. Then Danny went down. Machine gun burst across his chest, threw him backward, blood everywhere. He was dead before he hit the ground, the 19-year-old kid from Chicago who'd believed in Hollywood endings and never got one. His last expression was surprise, like he couldn't believe luck had finally run out. O'Connor turned back. That was his mistake. That was his love and his doom. He turned back to help Danny, to save a kid who was already gone. Because that's who Michael O'Connor was. A man who couldn't leave anyone behind. The German soldier who shot him was young too. Probably scared, definitely doing his job. The bullet hit O'Connor in the neck, below his helmet, above his armor. He dropped his rifle. Reached for Catherine's photograph. Never touched it. He looked at me as he died. His eyes were calm, accepting, maybe even relieved. The war was over for him. The fear could stop. He tried to say something. Blood filled his mouth. He slumped forward. Sergeant Michael O'Connor died in a ravine in Normandy, France, at approximately 8:30 hours on June 6, 1944. He never married Catherine. They never had 3 kids. He never experienced normal, beautiful, boring happiness. He was 28 years old. Tommy and I should have died there too. Maybe we deserved to, but the Americans further down the beach had finally broken through. Reinforcements were pouring up the bluffs. The Germans were retreating, and suddenly we were in the rear of a fleeing enemy instead of the front of a failed attack. We survived through timing and chance, and the sacrifices of hundreds of men we'd never know. We made it back to the beach as the tide turned. The invasion succeeded. By evening, thousands of Allied troops controlled positions inland. The Atlantic Wall had been breached. D-Day was a victory. The price was written in blood and bodies and men who'd smoked cigarettes 12 hours earlier. Jimmy found us first. He was crying openly, tears streaming down his face, asking about O'Connor and Danny. When I told him, he fell to his knees and prayed, his voice broken with grief but still praising God, still finding faith even there. Chen had been wounded, shrapnel in his shoulder, but refused evacuation until he'd treated everyone else. His face was hollow, aged decades in hours. Eddie sat against a destroyed pillbox, staring at the sea, unreachable. The lucky 7 had become 4. 4 survivors out of 7 who'd laughed just yesterday. 3 dead in a single morning. Webb, who never had a chance. Danny, who believed too much in goodness. O'Connor, who loved too much to leave the fallen. We didn't talk about them. Not then. Later, when the war ended, and we came home to a country that wanted heroes instead of broken men, we couldn't find words adequate to the loss. How do you explain that the bravest man you knew died trying to save a corpse? How do you justify surviving when better men fell? How do you carry the weight of their absence for the rest of your life? Jimmy became a minister after the war, devoted his life to serving others, never spoke about D-Day except to say God had spared him for a purpose. He died in 1989, peaceful in his sleep, surrounded by family. I hope he found the answers I never could. Chen became a doctor, brilliant and dedicated, saving hundreds of lives in a career that spanned 4 decades. He never married, never talked about the war. Died alone in 2003, and I didn't find out until weeks later. I should have kept in touch. I should have told him he was a hero. I waited too long. Eddie tried to be a comedian like he'd dreamed. Struggled with alcoholism and nightmares that never stopped. The war had broken something in him that laughter couldn't fix. He died in 1967, liver failure, alone in a cheap apartment. I spoke at his funeral. 5 people came. 5 people for a man who dreamed of making the world laugh. Tommy went back to Texas, to farming in silence, trying to lose himself in work and distance from memory. I visited him once in 1952. He showed me his rifle from the war, kept perfectly maintained, never fired again. He died in 1976, tractor accident. Maybe not an accident at all. I'll never know. I became a photographer, documented the world, searching for beauty in a landscape forever colored by that one day in Normandy. The photograph from June 5th sits on my desk, a reminder of what we were before the war took everything. 7 men smoking and laughing, 7 brothers who believed in luck. By the next day, 3 were gone. By the end, we were all casualties in different ways. I'm 98 years old now, the last survivor of the lucky 7. Soon, there will be no one left who remembers their faces, their voices, the way O'Connor's Boston accent got thicker when he was tired, or how Danny couldn't grow a beard, or the sound of Jimmy singing in the darkness. Their emotional war story will fade into statistics. 3 more among the 4,000 Americans who died on D-Day, among the 400,000 Americans who died in WWII, among the 70 million humans who died in that terrible conflict. But I remember. As long as I breathe, I remember. I remember the cigarette smoke and the laughter and the moment before everything changed. I remember that they were real people with dreams and families and futures stolen by history's hunger for sacrifice. I remember that they were brave and scared and human, and that their deaths meant something, even if I'll never fully understand what. This is their story. This is my testimony. This is what it means to survive when Brotherhood dies around you. The true war tale isn't glory or heroism sanitized for comfort. It's the weight of carrying their memories, the guilt of breathing when they can't, the responsibility of making their sacrifice mean something by refusing to forget. They smoked and laughed on June 5th, 1944. By dawn on June 6th, 3 were gone forever. By the time the war ended, we were all casualties of different kinds. Some died immediately. Others died slowly, across decades, haunted by memories that never fade. And one survived long enough to tell the story, to bear witness, to ensure that somewhere in the vast indifference of time, someone remembers that they existed, that they mattered, that they were loved. If this story touched your heart, share it so their memory lives on. Comment with the names of those you've lost. Subscribe to honor those who served. Let their sacrifice echo forward through time, so that future generations remember the cost of freedom and the price paid by ordinary men who became extraordinary through their courage and their loss. Remember them, please. That's all I ask. Remember,